She's still here because we haven't figured out what to do with her yet. Those were the words that changed everything. Emily thought I was too far away to hear her. She thought the music from my grandson's birthday party would drown out her voice. She thought a 68-year-old woman was invisible. The truth was, age had taken a few things from me, but my hearing was not one of them. I stood in the hallway holding a tray of cupcakes, frozen in place as those words settled into my chest. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood. I wanted to believe I had. But then I heard laughter. Soft, casual, comfortable. The kind of laughter that comes when someone says what they truly think. I carried the tray into the backyard anyway. I smiled. I handed cupcakes to the children. I asked my grandson if he liked his presents. I complimented the decorations Emily had chosen. No one noticed anything different. No one noticed that a small part of me had quietly broken. The party was held in the backyard of the house where I had lived for more than 30 years. The white fence needed fresh paint. The maple tree near the patio was taller than the roof now. My late husband, Richard, had planted it when our son Daniel was 10 years old. Every corner of that yard carried a memory. Birthday parties, graduation celebrations, summer barbecues, family photographs. I had always believed those memories meant something. Standing there that afternoon, watching people laugh and chat beneath strings of colorful lights, I began to wonder if memories only mattered to the people who remembered them. Emily moved gracefully through the crowd, greeting guests with her usual polished smile. Everyone loved her. She volunteered at church. She organized school fundraisers. She remembered birthdays and sent thoughtful cards. To the outside world, she was the perfect daughter-in-law. Sometimes I wondered if I was the only person who saw the subtle changes in her expression whenever she looked at me. Not hostility exactly. Something colder. Something that suggested I was an inconvenience she was too polite to mention. Daniel stood near the grill talking with neighbors. My son was 42 now. Successful. Responsible. Kind. At least, he used to be. Lately, he seemed tired whenever I spoke. Distracted. As if every conversation with me required more energy than he could spare. I told myself it was work. I told myself life was busy. Mothers become experts at making excuses for their children. It is one of the last gifts we give them. As the afternoon went on, I noticed something strange. Family photos were being taken near the patio. Emily called people together one by one. Her parents, her sister, the children, friends from church. Even neighbors joined a few pictures. Nobody asked me to step in. Nobody said, "Margaret, come over here." I stood alone near the lemonade table and watched the camera flash again and again. Perhaps it was accidental. Perhaps nobody noticed. Yet the feeling remained. A quiet ache beneath the surface. After the cake was served, I slipped inside the house to wash a few dishes. The kitchen was empty except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight spilled through the windows onto the countertops. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to stop smiling. I stared out at the backyard and watched my family through the glass. They looked happy, complete, whole, and suddenly I felt like a guest at my own life. Then my eyes landed on a folder sitting partially hidden beneath a stack of mail on the counter. My name was written across the front in black marker. Margaret Thompson. I reached for it slowly. I had no idea that what was inside would confirm my deepest fear and begin the most important chapter of my life. I picked up the folder and turned it over in my hands. It was not sealed. There was no note attached. Just my name written in Emily's neat handwriting. For several seconds I simply stared at it. Outside, I could hear children laughing and the faint sound of music drifting through the open patio door. Life continued as though nothing had changed. Yet something inside me told me this folder mattered. I opened it carefully. The first page appeared harmless enough. It was a brochure from a retirement community about 40 miles away. The cover showed smiling seniors walking beside a small lake. I frowned and flipped to the next page. There was a price sheet, then a floor plan, then an application form. My stomach tightened. Several sections had already been highlighted in yellow marker. I kept turning pages. Near the back was a handwritten list. Doctor records, prescription transfer, property inventory, mail forwarding. I read each item twice. Slowly, methodically. My hands remained steady, but my chest felt strangely hollow. The words were not proof of anything by themselves. People researched retirement communities all the time. Maybe Emily was helping someone from church. Maybe there was another explanation. I wanted there to be another explanation. Then I saw a sticky note attached to the final page. It contained only 4 words. Talk to Daniel Sunday. I stared at the note for a very long time. Sunday was tomorrow. A strange silence settled around me. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence that arrives when a person finally sees something they have been avoiding for years. I thought about the photographs outside. I thought about the conversation I had overheard earlier. I thought about all the little moments I had dismissed. The dinners I was not invited to. The decisions made without asking me. The family vacations I learned about after they were booked. One memory surfaced after another. 3 years ago, Emily had suggested that I stop driving at night. She said she worried about my safety. 2 years ago, she insisted on handling my online accounts because technology was becoming complicated. Last Christmas, she gently suggested that perhaps the upstairs bedroom was too much work for someone my age. Every comment had sounded reasonable, caring, even. Standing alone in that kitchen, I began to wonder whether I had mistaken management for kindness. I returned the papers to the folder exactly as I found them. Then I placed it back beneath the stack of mail. I did not want anyone to know I had seen it. Not yet. When I stepped outside, Emily was arranging candles on a picnic table. She looked up and smiled warmly. "Margaret, there you are. We were looking for you." Her voice was sweet, perfectly measured. I smiled back. I was just cleaning up a few dishes. She thanked me and returned to her task. Watching her, I realized something important. If she truly believed I was becoming a burden, confronting her now would accomplish nothing. She would deny everything. Daniel would defend her. I would look emotional and confused. No. If there was a truth hiding beneath the surface of this family, I needed facts before I spoke a single word. That evening, after the guests left and the house finally grew quiet, I sat alone in my bedroom. The grandfather clock downstairs marked each passing hour. Beside my bed stood a framed photograph of Richard. He had been gone for almost 6 years. I looked at his familiar smile and felt the weight of the day settle around me. "I think something is wrong," I whispered. The room offered no answer, only silence. Then my eyes drifted toward the small cedar chest at the foot of the bed, a place I had not opened in years. Inside were documents Richard always insisted should remain safe. At that moment, for reasons I could not explain, I suddenly felt compelled to see what was inside. I sat on the edge of my bed for several minutes before finally pulling the cedar chest closer. The brass latch felt cool beneath my fingers. Richard had always been meticulous about paperwork. Insurance documents, property records, investment statements, everything had its place. For years, I had rarely looked inside because he handled those matters with quiet confidence. After he passed away, I kept the chest exactly as he left it. Opening it felt almost like disturbing a conversation that had not yet ended. The scent of cedar drifted upward as the lid opened. Neatly organized folders filled the interior. I began sorting through them one by one beneath the warm glow of my bedside lamp. Tax returns, home insurance policies, old warranty documents. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed a large envelope near the bottom. My name was written across the front in Richard's familiar handwriting. Margaret. My heart skipped. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several pages. The first document appeared to be related to the house. I adjusted my reading glasses and began reading slowly. Within seconds, I realized this was not an ordinary file. It was a copy of a revised property agreement completed less than a year before Richard passed away. I read every line twice, then a third time. According to the document, ownership of the house had been transferred entirely into my name. Not shared ownership, not future ownership, complete ownership. I stared at the paper in disbelief. For years, I had simply assumed the house would automatically become part of Daniel's inheritance one day. We had never discussed it in detail. Richard always said there would be plenty of time for those conversations later. Apparently, later had arrived without me realizing it. Beneath the property agreement was a letter. The envelope had been sealed, but age had loosened the adhesive. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the pages. Richard's handwriting filled both sides. His words felt so familiar that for a moment I could almost hear his voice. He wrote about ordinary things at first. Family memories. Summer evenings on the porch. The grandchildren he hoped to know better. Then the tone shifted. He explained why he had transferred the house into my name. He wanted me protected. He wanted me secure. Most of all, he wanted me to remember that no matter what happened after he was gone, I would always have a home. One sentence stopped me cold. If anyone ever makes you feel unwanted in this house, remember that your name is the one on the deed. I lowered the letter slowly. The room seemed unusually quiet. Outside, a distant car passed along the street. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked once and then fell silent. Richard had written those words nearly 6 years ago. At the time, they probably seemed unnecessary. Our family appeared strong back then. Emily and Daniel had only been married a few years. The children were young. Everyone gathered for holidays. Everyone laughed around the same dinner table. Yet somehow Richard had anticipated a future I never imagined. I continued reading. Near the end of the letter, he urged me to trust my instincts. Not my fears. Not my worries. My instincts. The distinction mattered. Fear creates confusion. Instinct recognizes patterns. As I folded the papers and returned them to the envelope, dozens of small moments from recent years replayed in my mind. Emily insisting on handling family schedules. Emily correcting me in front of guests. Emily speaking for Daniel before he could answer simple questions himself. None of those incidents seemed significant alone. Together, they formed a picture that was becoming harder to ignore. The next morning, I carried the envelope downstairs and locked it inside my desk drawer. Then I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table watching sunlight move across the floor. For the first time in a long while, I was not thinking about what Emily wanted. I was thinking about what I needed to know. And before Sunday arrived, I intended to find out exactly why my name had ended up on that retirement community application. Sunday arrived with clear skies and the kind of bright morning that made everything appear simpler than it really was. I spent the early hours watering the flowers near the front porch and thinking about the conversation that was supposedly waiting for me. Emily had no idea I had found the folder. Daniel had no idea I had read Richard's letter. For the first time in years, I was holding information they did not know I possessed. That realization gave me a quiet sense of calm. Around noon, my friend Susan Parker called. We had known each other for more than 30 years. She was one of the few people who still spoke plainly, without hidden meanings or careful performances. After a few minutes of casual conversation, she mentioned that she had seen Emily earlier that week. She was meeting someone at Brookside Retirement Village, Susan said. My grip tightened slightly around the coffee mug in my hand. Brookside? I asked as casually as possible. Yes, I was visiting a former neighbor there. I almost stopped to say hello, but Emily seemed busy with some administrator. They were reviewing paperwork. A silence followed. Susan sensed it immediately. Margaret, is everything all right? I looked through the kitchen window toward the backyard where Daniel had once played baseball as a little boy. I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. Susan had unknowingly confirmed what I already suspected. The folder was not an abstract plan. Someone had taken real steps. Someone had spent time preparing. Yet even then, I forced myself to remain careful. Assumptions can be dangerous. Facts matter. Evidence matters. Emotion alone solves nothing. Later that afternoon, Daniel and Emily arrived with the children. Emily carried a casserole dish. Daniel brought a bag of groceries. Everything looked normal. That was what struck me most. Major changes in life rarely announce themselves dramatically. They often arrive disguised as ordinary Sundays. We shared lunch around the dining room table. The children talked about school. Emily discussed a fundraiser. Daniel mentioned work deadlines. I listened more than I spoke. Watching them felt different now. I paid attention to details I once ignored. The quick glance Emily gave Daniel before certain topics. The way she smoothly redirected conversations. The way Daniel seemed to wait for her reactions before expressing his own opinions. After lunch, the children went outside to play. Emily volunteered to help clean the kitchen. Within minutes, Daniel approached me in the living room. His hands were buried in his pockets. His smile seemed unusually tense. Mom, there is something we wanted to discuss. There it was. The sentence from the sticky note. The conversation scheduled for Sunday. I nodded calmly. Of course. Daniel sat across from me, while Emily quietly joined us a moment later. She folded her hands neatly in her lap. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Emily offered a sympathetic smile. Margaret, we have been thinking about your future. The words sounded familiar. Rehearsed. Carefully chosen. I simply waited. Daniel cleared his throat. We just want to make sure you have the support you need as the years go by. Support. Future. Need. The language was gentle, almost comforting. Yet beneath every sentence I could hear the same message hidden inside the folder. Emily began describing retirement communities, activities, social events, maintenance-free living, security, friendship, opportunity. She spoke as though she were presenting a vacation package. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, both of them looked at me expectantly. They seemed surprised when I smiled. Not a forced smile, a genuine one. "That is very thoughtful," I said softly. "Tell me more." For the first time all afternoon, I saw a genuine confusion pass across Emily's face. Emily recovered quickly. She always did. The brief confusion vanished behind her practiced smile, and she continued describing the retirement community as if she were reading from a brochure. Art classes, walking paths, weekly social gatherings, transportation services. Daniel nodded along beside her. I noticed he rarely added details of his own. Most of the conversation came from Emily. Most of the enthusiasm came from Emily. Most of the planning, it seemed, also came from Emily. I listened carefully and asked simple questions. How long had they been researching these communities? Which locations had they visited? What made Brookside their favorite choice? Every answer revealed a little more than they intended. By the time the discussion ended, I knew they had spent months gathering information. Months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. Yet nobody had spoken to me about it until now. That realization lingered in my mind long after they left that evening. The following morning, I began paying closer attention to everything around me. Not with suspicion, with observation. There is a difference. Suspicion assumes. Observation notices. Over the next several days, small details started connecting in ways they never had before. One afternoon, I found Daniel measuring the guest bedroom. When I asked what he was doing, he hesitated before mentioning a possible renovation. Another day, Emily casually asked whether I still wanted to keep some of the older furniture upstairs. Her tone sounded innocent, but the timing felt strange. Later that week, I stopped by Susan's house for coffee. We sat on her back deck overlooking a quiet pond behind her neighborhood. A gentle breeze moved across the water. For a while we talked about grandchildren, gardening, and ordinary things. Then Susan looked at me carefully. "You seem different lately." I smiled. "Do I?" She nodded. "Calmer. Not happier. Just calmer." I thought about that. She was right. A week earlier, I might have felt frightened or hurt. Now I felt focused. Richard's letter had changed something inside me. It reminded me that uncertainty is not weakness. Sometimes uncertainty is simply the beginning of understanding. Before I left, Susan mentioned something else. During her visit to Brookside, she had overheard an administrator discussing waiting lists. Apparently, someone had been eager to reserve a unit quickly because a family transition was expected soon. She did not know names. She did not know details. Yet the comment stayed with me throughout the drive home. Family transition. Such a polite phrase. People often hide difficult intentions behind gentle language. That evening, I opened my desk drawer and read Richard's letter again. Slowly, every word. By the time I reached the final page, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called an attorney the next morning. Not because I planned to fight anyone. Not because I wanted revenge. I simply wanted facts. The attorney's office scheduled an appointment for the following Thursday. Until then, I continued my routine exactly as before. I watered flowers. I attended church. I babysat the grandchildren after school one afternoon. Nobody suspected anything had changed. Then, late Wednesday evening, an unexpected message appeared on my phone. It was from Daniel. "Mom, Emily and I would like to stop by tomorrow night. There are a few more details we should discuss." I stared at the message for several seconds. A few more details. The words felt strangely significant. Whatever came next, they believed they were guiding the conversation. They believed they were controlling the outcome. As I set my phone down and looked toward the framed photograph of Richard on the bookshelf, I found myself smiling softly. For the first time, I was no longer certain that things would unfold the way Emily expected. Thursday arrived with steady rain tapping against the windows. The weather seemed fitting for a day devoted to difficult truths. My appointment with the attorney was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning. I arrived 15 minutes early carrying the envelope Richard had left behind. The office was small, quiet, and lined with shelves filled with legal books. Nothing about it felt dramatic. Yet by the time I left, I understood more about my situation than I had in the previous 6 years. The attorney reviewed every document carefully. He examined the property records, the transfer agreement, and Richard's letter. When he finally looked up, His conclusion was simple. The house belonged entirely to me. There were no conditions, no shared ownership clauses, no future claims waiting to activate. Legally speaking, the matter was remarkably clear. I thanked him and asked several additional questions. What rights did I have? What obligations existed? What protections were already in place? The answers strengthened my confidence. For the first time since finding the folder, uncertainty began giving way to clarity. On the drive home, I stopped at a small coffee shop near the courthouse. I sat beside the window and watched people hurry through the rain carrying umbrellas and briefcases. Everyone seemed busy with their own concerns. It reminded me that every family carries private stories invisible to the outside world. Some stories are built on trust. Others are built on assumptions. Mine appeared to be changing from one into the other. That evening, Daniel and Emily arrived exactly when they said they would. The children were spending the night with Emily's parents, which immediately told me this conversation was intended to be serious. Emily carried a folder. Daniel carried a strained expression. We sat in the living room. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Emily placed the folder on the coffee table and smiled. We wanted to show you some options. She opened the folder and began presenting photographs of retirement communities. Brookside appeared first, then two others located within 50 miles. The presentation was polished, organized, prepared. Every page included notes about amenities, transportation services, dining plans, and community activities. Months of research sat inside that folder. Months. I listened quietly. Daniel occasionally added a comment, but Emily clearly led the discussion. Finally, she reached the last page and folded her hands. We think this could be a wonderful next chapter for you. Next chapter. Another gentle phrase. Another carefully chosen description. I looked at both of them before speaking. How long have you been planning this? The question seemed to catch them off guard. Emily answered first. We have discussed it off and on for a while. How long? I repeated softly. This time Daniel spoke. About 8 months. 8 months. I nodded slowly. 8 months of discussions. 8 months of research. 8 months without a single conversation involving the person whose future they were supposedly planning. The silence stretched. Emily shifted slightly in her chair. Daniel looked toward the window. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling angry, I felt sad. Not because they had plans. Everyone makes plans. I felt sad because they never considered speaking with me as an equal participant in my own life. They had already decided what was best. They had simply arrived to deliver the conclusion. Emily eventually broke the silence. Margaret, we only want what is best for you. I met her eyes and offered a calm smile. I believe you think that. Neither of them seemed sure how to respond. And for the first time since this entire situation began, I realized something important. The conversation was no longer moving in the direction they expected. After they left that evening, I remained in the living room long after the front door closed behind them. The house was quiet again. The same house where Daniel had taken his first steps. The same house where Richard and I had celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and countless ordinary evenings that once felt endless. I looked around the room and realized something that should have been obvious much earlier. Emily and Daniel were not asking whether I wanted a different life. They were presenting a plan they expected me to accept. Somewhere along the way, my opinion had become a formality. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. A pale orange glow stretched across the horizon outside my bedroom window. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Richard's letter beside me. I had read it so many times that parts of it lived in my memory now. One sentence continued returning to me. Trust your instincts. For years, I had ignored mine because I wanted peace. Peace is a beautiful thing, but sometimes it comes at a cost. Sometimes peace becomes silence. Sometimes silence becomes permission. I was no longer willing to confuse those things. Around noon, Susan stopped by unexpectedly carrying a small basket of muffins she had baked that morning. We sat on the porch while a gentle breeze moved through the trees. I told her everything. The folder, the retirement communities, the conversation, the attorney. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. Do you know what bothers me most? She asked. The fact that nobody asked what you wanted. I smiled sadly. That seems to be a recurring theme. Susan studied me for a moment. What do you want? The question caught me off guard. Not because it was difficult, because nobody had asked it. Not Daniel. Not Emily. Not even me. I stared across the front yard as I considered the answer. I want to be treated like I still belong here, I finally said. Susan nodded. That sounds reasonable. It did sound reasonable, yet somehow it felt revolutionary. Later that week, another detail surfaced. Daniel called to ask whether I would be home Saturday afternoon. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Too cheerful. He explained that he and Emily wanted to bring over a real estate consultant. According to him, the consultant specialized in helping families evaluate future housing options. Future housing options. Another harmless phrase. Another carefully wrapped package hiding a different intention. I agreed to the visit without hesitation. Daniel seemed relieved. That reaction interested me. He sounded like someone expecting resistance. Instead, he was receiving cooperation. The truth was simple. The more comfortable they became, the more they revealed. Saturday arrived right on schedule. The consultant toured the property, taking notes and measurements while Emily asked dozens of questions. Questions about square footage, property values, renovation costs, resale potential. Very few questions involved me. Most involved the house. Watching them move from room to room, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Clarity. The distinction mattered. Anger clouds judgment. Clarity sharpens it. By the end of the afternoon, I knew exactly where everyone's attention was focused. It was not on my happiness. It was not on my future. It was on the possibilities attached to this property. As the consultant prepared to leave, he casually mentioned that homes in this neighborhood were selling for record prices. Emily's eyes brightened for just a second. A very small reaction. Most people would have missed it. I did not. That evening, after everyone left, I walked slowly through each room of the house. The dining room, the family room, the staircase Richard built with his own hands during a renovation decades earlier. Every corner held a memory. Every memory reminded me of one undeniable fact. This house had never been about money to me. But to someone else, it clearly had become exactly that. And for the first time, I began considering a possibility that had never crossed my mind before. If Emily and Daniel believed they already knew how this story would end, they were about to be surprised. The following week moved quietly on the surface, but beneath that calm, everything was changing. I stopped thinking about what Emily and Daniel expected from me and started thinking about what I wanted my future to look like. It was a subtle shift, yet it changed everything. One afternoon, I drove to a small lakeside community about 30 miles away. Susan had mentioned it months earlier. The area was peaceful. A walking trail followed the shoreline. Small cottages sat beneath tall oak trees. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Elderly couples sat on porches drinking iced tea and talking with neighbors. Nobody looked rushed. Nobody looked like they were trying to escape their lives. I spent nearly 2 hours there, simply observing. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that belonged entirely to me. Not one designed by Emily. Not one negotiated by Daniel. Mine. When I returned home, I found a message waiting on my answering machine. It was from Daniel. He sounded excited. He asked if we could all meet for dinner on Friday because there were important updates to discuss. The word updates immediately caught my attention. People use that word when they believe progress has already been made. Friday evening arrived. Emily had chosen the restaurant. It was one of those modern places with polished wood tables, soft lighting, and large windows overlooking downtown. Daniel greeted me warmly. Emily seemed unusually cheerful. Throughout dinner, they talked about ordinary subjects. School events, work projects, vacation ideas. The conversation felt strangely rehearsed. I waited patiently. Eventually, Emily set down her glass and smiled. We have some good news. Daniel nodded beside her. We think we found the perfect solution. I folded my hands and listened. Emily explained that a unit at Brookside had unexpectedly become available. Apparently, the waiting list had moved faster than anticipated. She described the apartment in great detail. The layout, the amenities, the community activities. She spoke as though everything had already been decided. Then she slid a folder across the table toward me. My eyes rested on it for several seconds. The gesture felt familiar. Another folder. Another plan prepared without my involvement. Emily's confidence was impossible to miss. Daniel looked nervous but hopeful. They genuinely expected gratitude. That realization was perhaps the saddest part of all. I opened the folder. Inside were brochures, reservation forms, and several documents already partially completed. My personal information appeared on multiple pages. Name, address, emergency contacts, medical information. I read quietly while neither of them spoke. Finally, I closed the folder and looked up. Emily's smile remained fixed in place. "What do you think?" she asked. The restaurant noise seemed to fade into the background. I studied their faces. My son, my daughter-in-law, two people who believed they were presenting me with a future. Two people who never stopped to ask whether I wanted it. For a moment, I thought about confronting them right there. I thought about Richard's letter, the deed, the attorney, the months of planning they had hidden from me. But clarity had taught me patience. So instead, I smiled. A calm smile. The same kind of smile Richard used whenever he already knew something others did not. "I appreciate all the effort," I said softly. Relief immediately appeared on Daniel's face. Emily practically glowed with satisfaction. Neither noticed what I did not say. I did not agree. I did not sign anything. I simply thanked them for their effort. As dinner ended and we walked toward the parking lot, Emily slipped her arm through Daniel's and whispered something that made them both smile. They looked like people standing at the finish line of a long race. Watching them, I realized they had made one very important mistake. They believed this story was almost over. In reality, it had only just reached the point where the truth would finally matter. 3 days later, I invited Daniel and Emily to the house for Sunday lunch. The invitation surprised them. I could hear it in Daniel's voice when he accepted. Emily sounded pleased. They probably assumed I had finally reached a decision. In a way, they were right. By noon, the dining room table was set. The grandchildren laughed in the backyard. Sunlight streamed through the windows. It looked like an ordinary family gathering. That was exactly what I wanted. After lunch, I asked the children if they would like to help me feed the ducks at the small pond near the end of the street. They ran outside excitedly, and Daniel followed to keep an eye on them. Emily and I remained alone in the dining room for a moment. She smiled politely. "This was lovely, Margaret." I returned the smile. "Thank you." A few minutes later, Daniel came back inside. I waited until everyone was seated before placing a large envelope on the table. The room grew quiet. Emily glanced at Daniel. Daniel looked at me. Neither spoke. I slid the envelope toward them. "There are a few things I would like you to read." Daniel opened it first. Inside were copies of the property records, the deed, and several legal documents. I watched his expression change as he turned each page. Confusion became surprise. Surprise became silence. Emily leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. The confidence I had seen for months slowly faded from her face. Nobody said a word for several seconds. Finally, Daniel looked up. "Mom, the house is in your name?" I nodded. "It has been for almost 6 years." Emily blinked several times. "I did not know that." Her voice sounded smaller than usual. "I know," I replied gently. Another silence followed. This one felt different. Not hostile. Honest. For the first time, nobody was performing. Nobody was managing the conversation. The truth was simply sitting there between us. Daniel looked down at the papers again. "Why did Dad do this?" I reached for the letter Richard had written years ago. The edges were worn from being read so many times. "Because he wanted to make sure I always had a home." Daniel read the letter slowly. By the time he finished, his eyes remained fixed on the final page. I could almost see memories moving behind them. Memories of his father. Memories of this house. Memories of choices made without enough thought. Emily sat quietly. The certainty she carried for so long seemed to have disappeared. Then she surprised me. "Margaret," she said softly, "I owe you an apology." I did not respond immediately. I wanted to hear the rest. "We should have talked to you first. We should have asked what you wanted." Daniel nodded. "She is right." The room became still. I believe they meant it. Whether the apology came from guilt, embarrassment, or genuine understanding hardly mattered anymore. What mattered was that the truth had finally entered the conversation. I folded my hands on the table. "I spent months wondering why nobody asked me about my own future," I said. The answer hurt more than I expected. Neither argued. Neither defended themselves. Sometimes silence says enough. Then I told them about the lakeside community I had visited. I explained that I was considering selling the house one day. Not because anyone pushed me. Not because anyone planned it for me. Because I might choose that path myself when the time felt right. Their expressions changed again. This time there was no disappointment. Only understanding. The difference was important. Later that afternoon, after everyone left, I sat alone on the back porch. The maple tree Richard planted decades earlier moved gently in the breeze. The yard looked exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Not because I had won. This was never about winning. It was about remembering something I should never have forgotten. A home is not defined by who expects to inherit it. A home is defined by the person who protects it. For years, I thought my greatest gift to my family was sacrifice. I was wrong. My greatest gift was teaching them that respect must come before any plan, any property, and any expectation. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, I felt a peace that had been missing for a very long time. And for the first time since Richard passed away, the future felt like it belonged to me again.